You're listening to AW360, a podcast from Advertising Week. AW360 features thought leadership conversations with the best and the brightest in the advertising, marketing, and technology communities. If you enjoy AW360, we'd appreciate it if you took the time to subscribe on your podcast platform of choice, left a positive review, or shared with your friends and colleagues. Thanks for listening. In this episode of the AW360 podcast, we're joined by Matt Owens, Chief Design and Innovation Officer at Athletics, a boutique brand innovation studio based in New York. Matt shares how Athletics helps brands navigate a rapidly evolving creative landscape, from building living brand systems to embracing artificial intelligence not as a crutch, but as a creative co-pilot. We hope you enjoy this episode. Matt Owens, thanks for being on the AW360 podcast today. I'm so pleased to have you.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. Appreciate the time.
So you're Chief Design and Innovation Officer at Athletics. Tell us a bit about Athletics and your role there.
Athletics is a brand innovation studio in New York. We've been around in some form or fashion for almost 2 decades. We're about somewhere in that 30 to 40 person territory. And I'd like to, I like to consider us sort of boutique enterprise, small enough to do big things, big enough to do small things, but always doing it at kind of that enterprise level. So that's what we try to achieve.
So the boutique agency model is alive and well. You're proof of that. You've been around for a couple decades now. What are some of the advantages for brands when working with a boutique agency?
Well, the fact that we have, our senior leaders, Malcolm Buick, and was at Wolf Hollins for many years before he came to us, roughly 12, 14 years ago. I'd like to think that because we're so small and because we have, leaders at the top that actually like each other and enjoy doing the work, is that we're a little bit more close in, and that the distance between, say, a CMO, an ECD, and your team here is it's very narrow, right? It's very small. And because we work with, large brands with really amazing internal teams, I think you just end up having to go toe to toe. And when you have a larger, bigger, agency that might have their own sort of, rigid processes or huge teams, this lacks maybe that flexibility and that on the ground agility, getting in there and making it. I mean, we come from a culture of makers, first and foremost. So I think that maybe separates us, is that enterprise rigor, enterprise thinking, but, willing to roll up our sleeves.
Full transparency, I pretty much ask this of everybody right now just because it's such a hot topic. When it comes to AI, though, and agencies, I'm particularly interested in how each is using it, particularly, on the creative side, strategy side, things like that. How are you at Athletics working with AI to then work with brands?
Well, AI is, I'd say, if you look back in like January 2023, when, sort of Mid-Journey became really popular, I would say to now we have a normalization of AI sort of within project management and ideation, right? So like GPT-4 is out there, Gemini, I feel like all of those things are working for brands and businesses and allowing us to augment ideation, project management, all those good things. I think the thing that has yet to really get cracked is at this large enterprise level, you have teams that need to do day-to-day work, and AI tools aren't really at the level of maturity to be able to institutionalize them, right? And so as an agency, what we're trying to do is use them as much as possible. Like, we have a great relationship with Adobe Firefly. We're actively using these tools, and then we're trying to understand how to fit them into the workflow sort of preemptively instead of reactively. And so I think that just comes from like the maker experimenter mindset. It's like none of these, whether it's Runway or whether it's Stable Diffusion or whatever it is, if you're not actively sort of interrogating them you can't educate your clients as to sort of the good, bad, and in between of them. And I still think we're a ways off, even Figma AI is still in beta. So like what it means is like the normalization of sort of a GPT-4 or Gemini, great. Let's keep doing that. How this comes into like brand systems work is still kind of in its infancy, I think, to a degree.
And when it comes to those brand systems, everybody has to kind of be everywhere right now when it comes to, all brands. Does AI assist you in any way on that side of things? Maybe taking a piece of creative and putting it in 14 different places. Is that accelerating that process or making it any easier? Or is it just vary so much between clients?
I mean, the novelty of it just allows the ideation phase and like the experimentation phase to be so much fun. So, we'll be in there doing something and getting into runway and making things move. We'll be experimenting at GPT-4 and sort of figuring, sort of entertaining ourselves and exploring at the same time. So I think it's really energized the sort of brand to life process. I think once you get into brand finalization and brand rigor, that's a different animal entirely. And I've read it, written about it many, many times, which is, there's no such thing as like the RAG for brand identity, right? There's no the retrieval of brand rules, examples, history, and the generation of those into new outputs just yet. And so when the RAG for brand identity gets invented, whoever that might be, or if, I would say that we're a few years out for it to become this amazing thing that everyone understands. You're still in this kind of like AI novelty experimentation mode, and then getting it into the systems to say, even, Figma AI is amazing, but it's just sort of a starter pack, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. The idea of a living brand system, I think is what you said earlier, is incredibly interesting to me. Can you explain both what that means and how is it of benefit to brands?
Well, a living brand system is, the holistic look at the brand from everything from button to billboard and the whole like consumer and customer experience. And for us, that touches, just not just traditional brand identity, like, colors, fonts, logos, all those kinds of things, but it's like it's sound, it's motion, it's behavior. And what we're seeing is that because we're small and we do all of these things in a kind of a holistic way, some big companies are love it and are already kind of seeing everything from like product development to marketing to brand development. They're seeing it all as very, very interrelated. And then there's larger companies that have been around for a long time that are maybe still a little bit behind. And so what we try to do as an agency is sort of come to the table, seeing everything as interrelated and using that as just an exciting way to educate our clients or work alongside them so that, when we're doing something, we're not so siloed. So I think it's the savviness of the clients you're working for. I would say the larger technology companies we work for are amazing because sometimes they're even ahead of us. And then you have larger companies that maybe are still struggling with adopting AI, are still stuck in sort of like terrible PowerPoint world and are still struggling to break free.
Yeah, unfortunately, AI hasn't really solved the boring PowerPoint problem very well, at least as far as I've seen. It's a pretty fast moving world, to say the least, but particularly on social platforms where everything is kind of instantaneous. And I always look back at that Oreo cookie tweet as that moment where all of a sudden this expectation of real-time messaging and reaction suddenly became the norm and the standard and the thing that everybody, for better or for worse, tries to achieve. How do you at Athletics adapt and refine brand strategies in real time or near real time?
I mean, for us, it's really about keeping our teams. I mean, strangely, it's less about the tools and more about the mindset, to be honest. It's like if you can keep your teams really small and senior, and you can keep the ideation with the client really compact, I think that actually allows you to operate in real time more quickly. I think there's a little bit of an addiction to technology. Hey, we're going to adopt this thing and it's going to make everything go faster. Actually, I think it's the mindset shift is the biggest part of it for us. And I like to, I was talking to one of our senior strategists. It's like IRL is so hot right now. And it's like, because of the remote work thing, we were all Zoom call, Zoom call, Zoom call. And now we're like, hey, let's stop. Let's do a 1 day work session in real life. Let's build that cultural bond. Let's build that intellectual bond with the team that we've never met before. Let's go deep, and build that trust early. And that actually allows us to like work more quickly, once we start to figure out what tools they're using, and all those good things. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I actually don't believe it's a technology problem. I think it's actually a mindset problem.
No, I love that. I think that you're absolutely right. When it comes to that trust part of it, though, I mean, that's something that, obviously trust in building trust with different brands probably varies in how long that takes, depending upon the brand's history and, other various factors. Do you find that utilizing technology and having, a certain amount of mastery of it and being ahead of the game in wherever you can, does that help you build that trust faster, or is it also not necessarily technology related?
Yeah, I like the way I kind of see it is that you have to meet every client at their level of brand maturity, right? Internally. And so if the team is at a certain kind of maturity where they're like, hey, we do all this already, we're all in Figma working collaboratively, everything's great, then you can meet that internal client team at that level of brand maturity and operate in that kind of fast, agile, great way. But then there's other instances where maybe they're used to be a startup and they're a grow up brand and they have those tools, but they don't necessarily, they're still a little, maybe not as refined in their methodologies. And so it's our responsibility as an agency to sort of, meet them where they are and then get really, really clear on where we want to be. And so I think it's all about that level of brand maturity and in diagnosing that early and saying like, okay, this is where they're at. This is their strength. This is their weaknesses. This is maybe something we're missing. And then once you figure that out and that's very clear, helps you build the trust, because I think the lack of trust is when there's these disconnects, right? And you're like, oh, well, I thought you guys did it this way. Actually, we only do it that way. Or actually, our teams aren't even integrated. And so it's asking those right questions so you can have that fit early on.
It feels like the more clients that you bring on and the more you learn about them and discover these places where maybe you're missing elements along the way, you're almost kind of creating like a snowball effect
Yes.
of knowledge and skill. How much further do you think that goes? I mean, obviously nobody can tell the future, but I'm really into asking people, what they see down the road. And so, on the future proofing side, what are you doing? Or maybe also, what have you seen right over the horizon that you're most excited about?
I feel like it's the move from like template thinking and systems thinking to sort of like modularity as a mindset and principles over rules. So looking at almost, it's almost like brand systems as an extension of the brand values, which is like, does this feel like something we would be doing? Not so much like, is this rule being adhered to or broken or not? It's more a little holistic and a little bit larger. And what that allows you to do is sort of like, it's not, I think there has been in the past when it comes to sort of brand governance in general, there's just a worry that things get fractured so easily, so quickly, right? Different teams at different levels, different altitudes of skill, all of those kinds of things. And so I think moving away from like, hey, this is, a bilateral, this is working, this is not, this is broken, adhering the rules, this is not, to more like, let's set up the environment for success. Let's set up modular tools that allow you to succeed within a predefined sandbox, right? Like we built a tool called Sesame that was born out of stuff that we did with Square for their motion principles. It wasn't about those tools aren't about like confining, they're about giving you the ecosystem to be creative, right? And there's some rules and governance and some territories that you have to kind of operate within, but within that you're free to do a lot of different things. And I think that's just a little bit of a mind shift. And as we get into like more digitally enabled sort of future proofing, like, hey, we're all on, we go all in on Frontify, or like we have our rigorous Figma libraries, this kind of rigorousness. is not about like confinement. It's about giving people a sort of the shared sandbox to really be creative in, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Principles over rules to me is either a really great t-shirt or the name of your book. Either one, maybe both, maybe both. That's a great way of putting it though. When you look at technologies that have kind of come up, some of them succeed, some of them don't. Some of them get a little too much more hype than maybe they should have. I always point at 5G as being this thing that was kind of, it's going to enable it's going to cure cancer. And it's like, well, half the time it doesn't work if you're in Manhattan. But, you know, there's Web3, there's AI, there's the metaverse. Which of these things did you really look at, or are you still looking at as, maybe its time just wasn't here quite yet, if any?
I mean, I feel like just augmented reality things in general are still really hard to adopt. And I always, it's sort of like I love the BlackBerry movie where it's like, it's a pager, it's a phone, it's email, right? It's things you understand. It's like when you put knowledge into a pair of like sunglasses, it becomes like, well, what am I doing? Right. It's the gap to understanding and mass adoption becomes farther and harder to bridge. And so I think those are really the tricky spots. I think inevitably, I mean, I think actually being able to use GPT-4 on an app and talk to it on your phone is actually a really simple example of where I think things are headed, right? It's like using voice to sense make, which we all do normally, and then having that become artifactualized into templates, whatever designs. And so I think it's less about creating another device, so to speak, and it's more about doubling down on natural behaviors and getting those behaviors that we naturally do, speaking, ideating, discussing, and getting those to work for us into like kind of communication artifacts and shortening that distance. I think that's really where the future is.
Yeah, I'm not sure Apple would love that answer, but I do. I don't need another device. I have enough of their stuff. I just need all the stuff to work better.
Exactly. Exactly. I totally agree.
Given the disparity in agreement in, the country and the world right now, how are you finding working with brands with all of that going on? Not picking a side or anything of that sort, but just in general. I mean, are brands more cautious, less cautious, or, business as usual?
I would say businesses, the vocabulary of enterprise businesses they're obviously concerned about like all the machinations of like the global economy, of course. I think individually, when you go inside of those businesses and you look at creatives within them, I think everyone within the creative world is like super energized about all the possibilities. And we know the world's going to be very, very different in 5 years, whether that's electricity and electric cars, or whether the normalization of certain AI behaviors. I think sociopolitically, there's a concern because I think what we all want is we all want to do great work that adheres to our own values as individuals, right? And I think there's a sensitivity in this day and age on, hey, what big brands and big businesses need to accomplish economically and what we believe individually are often coming into conflict, or there's a nuance there, right? And so I would say I'm always a huge advocate for the creative enterprise and for the individual, because that individuality is what makes working at companies amazing, right? And then being able to embrace the individuality of others. It's the age old, 1 + 1 = 4, right? It's like embrace the strengths of the people around you, and to work together is what makes businesses amazing. And so there is going to be a delta, and there continues to be a delta. And as a business owner, I'm hypersensitive to that. It's like I'm everyone's biggest fan internally and externally. And I think we're all going to need to really double down through the work and through being really thoughtful to each other and thoughtful to the business needs to like make the right decisions. And I think it's become more complex, clearly. And some of the things that we're struggling with, the episodic nature of work, the fact that, a lot of leaders, don't stick around more than 3 years. So you're always kind of chasing the other next opportunity. I think the way you deal with that is you do great work and you're an advocate for the best in everyone. That's all you can really hope for. And I think picking sides, personally, I think you pick your battles and you try to have a nuanced and thoughtful and deep discussion with leadership and with your team when those things come up, right? I think transparency is the answer. Honesty is the answer. And coming to the table saying, we might not agree in this, whatever that might be, but our goal is to get to a consensus to do great work and to be proud of what we're doing. And that should be the lens with which we kind of operate, in my mind.
If one wanted to find out more about athletics or yourself, where should they go?
Go to athleticsnyc.com. I would say, the thing that we do well and that we really enjoy is we have a lot of rebel optimism for all the things we do. I think everyone in this world, it's like we're in a world of a lot of uncertainty. And I personally think that this time of uncertainty makes it really exciting. And that if you have kind of a really optimistic mindset and you're willing to roll up your sleeves and get it done, I think that it's the answer always. It doesn't matter if it's 1993 or 2025, the answer is in the making. And I think that's really where the sweet spot is.
Well, Matt Owens, thanks so much for taking the time to be on the show today. This was fantastic.
Hey, I appreciate it. And, appreciate the time and, check out Athletics NYC. And, I think, having some rebel optimism is going to always, champion, whatever comes our way.
Rebel Optimism, also another great t-shirt or bumper sticker, or perhaps book title. Thanks so much.
All right. Take care. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to AW360. For more podcasts like this one, be sure to check out Advertising Week's ever-growing roster of podcasts for the advertising, marketing, and technology industries, including The Trust Makers, our podcast with the Edelman Trust Institute, now in its 4th season. You'll find all of Advertising Week's podcasts at www.advertisingweek.com/podcasts. Thanks for listening.